Welcome to the Empowerment Zone with Ramona Houston, where we zone in on Black and Brown relations and our journey to empowering our communities.
Thank you for joining the Empowerment Zone. I am your host, Ramona Houston. Man, it is April 21st, the day after the conviction of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. And we are absolutely elated as a country that we are in this historical moment, because it appears that this is going to be a change of course in history, where people in law enforcement are held accountable for their actions, particularly against people of color. We've seen a lot of African Americans, Latino Americans, Native Americans brutalized and murdered in the hands of law enforcement. And there's rarely a conviction. And so we are celebrating this moment today. And ironically, our guest today is the Reverend Tyrone McGowan Jr., and he's going to talk to us all about faith and social justice. What a pleasure it is for me to have him here. I cannot believe we have him on the day after this conviction, and he's going to really explore the issues we're dealing with as African Americans, COVID-19 pandemic and the 1619 pandemic. So you shouldn't call it the 1619 pandemic, but the issues surrounding racial and social justice centered around the first Africans arriving on the shores of America. For full disclosure, Reverend McGowan is one of my former students, and he's doing great work. And I'm just so happy and thrilled to have him here. He's the first of one of my former students at Morehouse College to be on my show. So this is a historical moment for me as well. Reverend Tyrone McGowan Jr. served as the senior pastor of the historic Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, and he has been the associate pastor for teens and campus ministries at the Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. But now he's full-time on the staff of Trinity. And for many of you who know, Trinity is one of those historic churches in Chicago that is led now by one of my classmates at Morehouse College, the Reverend Otis Moss III. He is a 2010 Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Morehouse College in Atlanta. And while at Morehouse, McGowan studied political science and served as the president and King Scholar of the Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel. He is also a 2013 graduate of Yale Divinity School, where he was the recipient of the prestigious Walcott Calkins Prize for Excellence in Clear and Vigorous Public Speaking. In March 2016, at the age of 28, he became one of the youngest inductees into the Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Preachers at Morehouse College. A minister with a social conscience, McGowan has served as a two-time United States congressional intern and as a research assistant for the Institute on Religion and Democracy in Washington, D.C. In October 2009, he had the privilege of participating on a CNN panel entitled Black Men in the Age of Obama. He has also been featured as a guest contributor on such programs as Upfront with the Reverend Jesse Jackson on the Rainbow Push Saturday morning Forum, the International Sunday School broadcast, and another Perspective radio show with Dr. Leon Finney. And I must say, he also used to work with Reverend Jackson. In 2015, he was selected as a summer fellow at an Institute for Interfaith, a new clergy program. Some of his writings, that was the Chautauqua. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Chautauqua.
Yeah.
Chautauqua Institution's Interfaith New Clergy program. Some of his writings on faith, politics, and culture have also been published in the African American Lectionary and in Reflections, a Yale University magazine. He is also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. So welcome to the Empowerment Zone. I'm your host, Ramona Houston, and we have the Reverend Tyrone McGowan today talking to us about faith and justice. Welcome, Reverend McGowan. How are you today?
Dr. Houston, I'm well. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to finally be on your program and this platform, and to you and your audience. I'm just elated to be on, and especially on the day after the verdict. It's just such an important day, and we have so many important issues to talk about. And I couldn't think of anyone else in the world I would want to talk about these issues with than you. So thank you for having me today.
I'm so honored to have you on this moment. You do such great work in the community on the national level as well as on the local level in Chicago, and really using your life to make a real difference and to make a social impact and really drive change. And a lot of people don't realize that it's individuals who drive change. You know, individuals are who make up organizations and institutions. And so I'm really happy that you would join us today. And with you being a millennial, you know, just talking about uh, your um, your perspectives and the perspectives of your age group and how to drive social change and how that is a continuation of generations before, but also very different, and how you all really move change and move the needle. So before we get started on your topic, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yes, born and raised in Chicago, South Side of Chicago, to two loving parents. I have a younger brother named Denzel, so he gets a lot of more attention than me because of but yeah, he went to Morehouse as well after me, so definitely excited about that. But born to two loving families, really,
Mhm.
with deep commitments to justice. Um, I grew up, spent a lot of time with my grandparents, my father's parents on the South Side, and a good way to understand me and how I am today. My grandmother, she would be in the kitchen. She always had the radio on the gospel station here in Chicago, 1390 AM 1390, playing gospel all day. And in my grandfather's room, he would have it on WVON. That's the Black talk radio of Chicago. So they talk about political issues on the local level, national level, and international. And so I was always kind of in those two worlds, the kind of Black church, Black faith world, and kind of this Black political world. My grandfather, growing up in the 80s, he was a advocate and proponent for Harold Washington. He was one of the leaders in the community, really advocating people to lead them to the polls to vote for Harold Washington. And so that kind of political DNA, that kind of faith-based DNA, community organizing has kind of been in my blood, been in my DNA. I was fortunate to go to Whitney Young High School here in Chicago. That's one of the magnet high schools. It was where our forever First Lady, Michelle Obama, graduated from Whitney Young. From there, I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, where I got my degree in political science. And from there, I went on to Yale Divinity School, Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, where I got my master's degree. Came back to Chicago and started working. As you mentioned, I worked for Reverend Jesse Jackson and Rainbow Push Coalition for a number of years, where I was served as a national field director. And so 2.5, 3 years just with, traveling the country with Reverend Jackson is just such you have an upfront seat, a front row seat to history. And we were at so many events from, Standing Rock in to Flint, Michigan, to the DNC convention in Philadelphia. We were everywhere on the front lines for justice and social change. And I was also the program director for a financial literacy program while I was at Rainbow Push that was geared to millennials and young adults, teaching them the basics of budgeting, credit, college financing, vehicle financing. After that, I was fortunate enough to come on staff at Trinity United Church of Christ, where my Morehouse brother, Pastor Otis Moss III, as you mentioned, is senior pastor. And I've been there for the last 3 years, serving and working in ministry and still on the front lines. Trinity is one of those unique faith communities that doesn't mind blending the sacred with the secular. So we're definitely committed to social justice and lifting up Christ, celebrating our culture, and really being on the front lines, advocating for our community, and doing it all at the same time, which is great.
Man, it must be really, really rewarding and fulfilling to be in ministry in a place that actually um, does the work that they profess to be about. I'm reading right now. I'm in the middle of Black Theology. I think it's Cohen. Have you read that book yet? But yeah. So anyway, he one of his arguments is that, the church has to be involved in the community and really live out the teachings of Jesus Christ and not just, use church as just a place to go and worship and talk about God, but also actually act on their beliefs. So tell me about your work from a millennial's perspective. What are the continuities that you see in terms of how uh, your generation has, modeled much of its work off of older generations, but yet and still is very different. How do you distinguish the social justice movement among this new group of activists?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Dr. Houston. And well, I want to kind of piggyback on what kind of my intro.
Hmm.
Um, I remember very vividly when I was probably 9 or 10 years old. Like I said, grew up in church, but I always wanted to know, hearing these sermons about Jesus and talking about Jesus, I wanted to know what color Jesus was. And I remember asking my pastor at the time, and what's the color of Jesus? He was like, well, Jesus is, whatever color you want him to be. He's a color, and I wanted him to say Jesus was black. That's all I wanted him to say. Because I wanted this Jesus to look like me.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I wanted to make these stories that I heard in the Bible, these miracles that I heard that Jesus performed, they needed to be real and concrete for me. This is me at 9 or 10 years old. This is
Hmm.
before I knew about liberation theology or James Cone.
Hmm.
And I think, his answer was not satisfactory to me, and it unsettled me. And it's something that I wrestled with because I wanted to make Jesus look like, I wanted to identify with him. And
Hmm.
I think from that moment, I was on a course to finding and identifying a Jesus that looked like me, and a Jesus that was committed to justice, not just performing miracles and saving your soul,
Hmm.
but literally saving your life on earth.
Hmm.
So you
Hmm.
can have an enjoyable life on earth and not have to wait to the afterlife.
Hmm.
And I think even at an early age, even though I could not articulate the way I can now, I was destined to be on this kind of course for justice.
Hmm.
And that takes you back to this question here, of looking at being a millennial, looking at these phases or these movements for justice and equality. Um, One of the benefits of working with Reverend Jackson so long is that you get, like I said, I feel like I've earned a degree, at least another master's public policy from just being with him. But he would always say, you can chart the movement for freedom of blacks in America in four movements or four phases. It's like a symphony. One, you have, us in chattel slavery, 1619. So we have the Middle Passage, of course, as you know, slave trade, slaveocracy. Then you move from there, you have Reconstruction and Jim Crow. That's phase two. Then you have kind of the right to vote, 1965. That's the next phase. Equal accommodations, that phase. And then you have what we're in now, I believe, the phase for economic freedom, economic justice. And I feel that we're still fighting phases 3 and 4. Right, we see in Georgia and Texas, there's still an assault on voting rights. There's still voter suppression in America that we have to fight against. It's literally ingrained in the fabric of our DNA as a nation, voter suppression. There's no federal law that guarantees the right to vote to all Americans, right? And that's a problem. The Electoral College is literally ingrained in it. The 3/5, you're 3/5 of a person. That's what the Electoral College is based off of, right? We should be fighting to expand the right to vote, making sure that when you automatically turn 18, you're guaranteed the right to vote. We should be expanding the right to vote to returning citizens, not trying to limit that right to vote. So we're still fighting that fight of equality at the voting booth, but also we're fighting this economic fight, and that fight has been enlarged, even more expanded in this past year in the pandemic, as we've seen the wealth gap expand. Billionaires have gotten even more wealthier, while the poorer are on the verge of just being wiped out. And so we have this kind of vast the social safety net is being wiped out as we speak. During this pandemic, we saw so many more people struggling, so many women, working women pushed out of the economy. We saw so many people on the verge of losing their homes, an eviction crisis. We saw so many people without health care, 30 million people already without health care, now trying to worry if I'm going to get this COVID, if I'm going to get infected with COVID, how will I make it then? And so, and of course, we're in this fight for 15, this fight for a living wage. You shouldn't have to work 4 and 5 jobs.
That's so true.
Ends meet, just to feed your children, just to make the decision, should I buy medicine today or should I buy grocery today? So many Americans are living in that reality, and that's literally a sin in this nation, the wealthiest nation in the world. There's so many people are living in poverty. So many people do not have adequate health care. So many people are worrying, if I get sick today, if I have to go into surgery, how will I still pay the rent? How will I still pay the mortgage? It's a sin that so many people are living that way. And we have to do something about it. We have to fight, and we have to make their voices heard. And that's one of the things I'm committed to here in Chicago and across the nation.
And you're so right in your analysis of all those challenges, those social, economic, and political challenges. How can we live in the most prosperous nation and still have these different problems and issues in our society that really marginalize and keep people oppressed, suppressed, and really economically exploited? And those are the issues that we're dealing with today. So what do you see as an activist and a man of faith is some of the solutions, and how your generation is going about solving some of these challenges?
Yeah, I feel what we're doing today, having the conversation is so important, and educating people on these issues are so important, because you'll be amazed that the average American is so aloof to these issues. It doesn't affect them. So they're going about their lives, and they don't really care. They don't have any empathy because it doesn't directly affect them. And I think, and I hope one of the lessons in this pandemic, it has taught us that, what affects one person directly affects all of us indirectly. What started out as some, distant virus, some distant sickness in Wuhan, China, eventually became all of our problems. And so we are connected. Dr. King said we're in this inescapable garment of equality. So if my neighbor doesn't have health care, if my neighbor If my neighbor's house catches on fire, I need to be concerned because the wind is going to blow in my house. So until we get that ingrained in our DNA, that we value each other, we see each other as how God created us. If we see each other as the imago Dei, the divine image of God is in someone else. I may not love the way that they love. I may not vote the way that they vote, worship the way they worship, but God is still in them. And the God in me has to recognize the God in them. And we must struggle together, stand up for freedom together, and fight together. And I think that's what's been so beautiful about this whole movement for justice and criminal justice with George Floyd. What we saw happen last May, what was a global movement. What happened in Minnesota and the conditions that it happened in, with the world being on lockdown. We were forced to see that video. We were, thank God for that teenage girl who had enough courage to take her phone out and record that, because if she didn't do that, who knows what would have happened on yesterday, or if yesterday would have happened. So we thank God for the bravery of that young, courageous, Black young sister. But what transpired was a global movement. People in England, people in Israel, people in all over in Africa, South Africa, were chanting George Floyd, were chanting Black Lives Matter. But now we have to follow this verdict with legislation. Congress must act now. Congress should have a mandate now to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We need to ban chokeholds. We need to ban putting your knee on someone's neck. That should never be a part of our law enforcement policy. We should promote de-escalation as a first resort. We should get away with qualified immunity. Just because you have a badge on does not make you above the law. It should make you accountable to upholding the law, but not make you above the law. We have to change this no-knock warrant policy, the policy that killed Breonna Taylor, the policy that could have killed a sister here in Chicago a couple years ago. And so this is just a small victory, because 10 miles away from where the decision happened yesterday, Dante Wright is going to be laid to rest tomorrow, on Thursday. Another unarmed Black man killed. And just as the verdict was being read yesterday, a teenage girl in Columbus, Ohio, was shot in the face by police. And so we have to know that, as Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We may not see justice fully achieved in our own lifetime, but every step we take, we have to make sure that we are advancing and getting towards what true justice, liberation, and equality look like for all of God's children.
Yes, and as you state that, one of the things you're saying, in order to have empathy for another human being, and in order for you to embrace that person as a full human being, you have to have a change of mindset, right? So, one of the books I just finished reading this week last week, White Fragility, where she talks about how white people need to change the way they think about how they live their lives on a daily basis, because of the fact that racism is so deep, and it penetrates our society. And so when you talk about changing mindset, what are your ideas on how you help people to see, like you just stated, people live their own lives and they're not affected by these particular incidents that happen to African Americans and Latino Americans and people of color. So we have to help them see. We have to teach. And so what are your solutions in terms of changing mindset of people? Because you have to change the mindset in order to even get those laws passed, right? Or there are people who pass those laws, right, in the legislation.
Right. You have to change minds, and change minds, change hearts. And I think, and I don't get too biblical. There's a scripture that talks about this. It says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against power, spiritual wickedness in high places. Which this is really a spiritual battle that we're in. Like, this is not, at the end of the day, we're all we're all a part of the same human race, the
Mm-hmm.
same human family. You know, we make these social constructs. We make
Mm-hmm.
these, you're black, you live on this side of town. You went to this school. We make these markers that segregate and separate ourselves from each other. That's not how God intended it to be in
So
creation,
true. Mm-hmm.
right? And so we have to do some real self-evaluation about how can we truly make the beloved community, and it comes with what happened yesterday, right? It's tragic that George Floyd had to lose his life over something so small as an alleged $20 bill, counterfeit bill. We don't even know if that's true or not. But even if it was true, write him a ticket and let him go on about his day. Why is it that Chauvin kept his knee on that man's neck for almost 10 minutes? It's because there was a spirit that came over
Mm-hmm.
Chauvin.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it in his face. You can see it on his body. They said, I am superior than you. I'm going to lord. Even the crowd. He wasn't afraid of the crowd. The crowd was made up of kids, a 9-year-old. He's afraid of a 9-year-old. He just made up in his mind at that moment that I'm in power. I have control. I have all control. I have all authority. But you have to be mindful that you submit to a higher authority, no matter who you are, where you are. And I think that that's where faith comes in, because we live by our faith, but we live under the law.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, our actions, our behaviors, our decisions, be they political, be they economic, be they social, are informed, are guided by our faith or lack thereof.
Mm-hmm.
Our faith speaks to our values or what we value. Our faith speaks to our morals. Our faith speaks to our vision for ourselves and the collective. And so our faith, for example, informs our budget. If you're gonna, if your budget for a city has, you spend $10 billion funding police departments, but you don't have money funding mental health centers. You take away mental health clinics. You close schools. You close and take away social resources from the community. That your faith or lack thereof hasn't made a decision, an important policy decision, where you don't value those disadvantaged. You don't value those disinherited, as Howard Thurman would say. And you made a decision almost implicitly that I'm going to put my stamp of approval on force, on police brutality, on white supremacy and oppressing Black and brown people. And that has to change. And I hope that what we saw yesterday is the catalyst, ignites that change. What we saw in the 60s with those 4 little girls. Sometimes you have to see the pain. Sometimes you have to see John Lewis coming across the Edmund Pettus Bridge being beat in the head. Sometimes you have to see those images to create a change internally. And I hope that that's what's happening with the conscience of America today.
Yes, and hopefully the consciousness of America today changes because of those images, and also really getting all Americans to recognize the importance of changing their minds and their hearts, and really practicing what they preach. Like you stated, our faith informs our actions. What you think is how you act, and so we really need to work on ourselves internally, individually, and then take the work that we've done in order to improve ourselves, to improve our organizations, institutions, and society. So I know I could talk to you all day about this, but in our final thoughts, tell us, what would you advise our audience to do in order to be more engaged citizens, and I mean citizens in terms of your community and in the global society, in making sure that we play our role in advancing the beloved community, as you stated, with that Dr. Martin Luther King discussed?
Yeah, I think big take home for me, for the audience, would be, I would always hear, he was college president at the time I was there, Dr. Robert Michael Franklin, at just about every one of his addresses to us as the student body, he would quote Rabbi Hillel, who would say the world is equally balanced between good and evil, but your
Mm,
next act will tip the scale. And
mm,
that's something that I live by, that my next act, my next thought, it could tip the scale either way, good or for evil. And I think if we could all live by that mantra, by that philosophy, the world will look so much better, the world will look so much differently. And I would encourage your listeners and your viewers to just stay abreast on these issues. You don't have to be as well versed as we are. We live and breathe this stuff, but don't just come around every 4 years. When it's election time. But we need to, if there's an election in your community for dog catcher, you need to be the first one in the poll at the polls to vote for dog catcher. We see how important state's attorneys are, how important it is to vote for judges. Educate yourself on. It's not that hard. We all have phones now. You can just, it's so easy to access information. Stay abreast on these issues, and join. If you're not a person of faith, I encourage everyone to be a part of a strong, committed a family of faith, a church family. If that's not your game or whatever, that's okay. There are many other organizations you can join, many other social organizations or institutions you could be a part of, contribute to: the NAACP, Rainbow Push, National Action Network, the Urban League. And they're nationwide. You can find a chapter, get active, and be a part of building this beloved community. Because again, the arc is long. We may not get there, but every step we take, we get closer. And so you need to ask yourself every day you wake up, how am I going to get closer to us achieving justice and achieving it today?
that's it. That you have the opportunity as an individual to tip the scale. You
Right,
have the opportunity as an individual to move forth this beloved community. You have the opportunity to make a change in your local community, not just every 4 years on the national level in terms of elections, but making sure that you are engaged locally in really changing the lives of people
right.
through your faith. Thank you so much, Mr. McGowan, Reverend McGowan, excuse
Thank you,
me.
Dr.
Thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for informing us about faith, the intersection of faith and social justice, and just all the work that you continue to do. Please give my classmate my love and hello for me, Reverend Moss, and I wish you the continued success, and I welcome you to come back anytime you want to come back.
Oh, thank you so much. Look forward to it.
Thank you. Hi, we have Reverend Tyrone McGowan here with us today to give us his strategy for college success. Mr. Reverend McGowan, could you tell us what school or schools did you attend? What were your major or majors? And tell us that strategy that you would give students to make sure that they're successful in college.
Hello, Dr. Houston. I'm calling Reverend Houston.
I used to get called that quite a bit, actually, as you know, with my teachings, right?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for having me again, Dr. Houston. This is just amazing to be on this platform and to share today with you and your audience. And I'm so excited for this topic because this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart as I work consistently with college age students and young adults on a day-to-day basis at Trinity. Um, but I think, well, first I'll start off with my journey. I went to Morehouse College, Atlanta, Georgia, where I majored in political science. From there, I went on to Yale University, Yale Divinity School, where I got my Master's of Divinity degree, where I studied, ethics, social ethics, and theology. And I mean, I want to commend college students because, especially this past year, the pandemic has disrupted so much, especially for those. I know so many students who were high school seniors last year who were looking forward to going to college and being away from home, and they're still stuck in their bedroom they grew up in. And so much of that experience was taken away from them. And so I just commend college students who are still getting scholarships, who are still making great, wonderful grades and making great strides, getting internships in the midst of a pandemic. I want to commend you this past year for your hard work and dedication to your academic success. Um, but I would say a few things. One, embrace the whole experience, because it goes by so quickly. Those 4 years fly by. So embrace every moment of it. I would also say, college is a period of self-discovery. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to know yourself. Do some self-interrogation. Those 4 years, you should be discovering who you are as a person. If you know, for example, you're not a morning person, then don't schedule your classes to start at 8 a.m. Right? So it's a period of discovering who you are as an individual, and own that, embrace that. I would also say become well balanced, become a well balanced individual. Don't become so rigid in your thoughts and your ideas and in your beliefs that you cannot, that you are not willing to be stretched as an individual, as a thought leader. Be open minded to different viewpoints, different religions, different orientations. Don't be so closed off, but be open to all the ideas that are coming your way. If you, for example, are a STEM person, you're strictly math and science, try just as hard in a philosophy class or an English class, and vice versa. Right? If there's a lecturer coming to campus, a guest coming to campus, go to that lecture and take notes and try to meet that person, try to get their email address, stay connected with that person, and build relationships. It's about building relationships and staying connected. And the point about being open-minded is so important, because it's something I did at Morehouse. Uh, I had an internship with Senator Johnny Isaacson when I was at Morehouse my junior year, and I'm a proud Democrat. And here I am, working for a good old Georgia Republican in his office. And it took a lot for me to even apply, but something in me said, no, apply it, be open to to this experience. And it was a very rewarding experience. And every time I was in DC, I would go stop by his office and talk to him, talk to his chief of staff, and still stayed in contact with them, all because I was open-minded to have a different experience. And so I encourage your listeners who are college age to don't be afraid to get outside of the box and do something differently. And again, build relationships. Relationships are so important. Relationships with your peers, your classmates, faculty, but also staff. Even the janitor, the person that's cleaning the dorm, the cafeteria people. I had a great relationship with them at Yale, because those sisters took care of me. They said, we see a Black man here, we're going to make sure that we feed you. And they fed me. And I didn't have any money at Yale. They fed me. So I thank them to this day. And you never know who these people are connected to. You never know if they're the son of a CEO of some company you're trying to apply for a job with later on. You never know who you're going to meet. So relationships matter, and relationships are important. Summer internships are so critical. I did several on Capitol Hill. I mentioned one with Senator Isaacson. They're so important because they kind of help you form your identity, what you want to do going forward in your future, in your career. Also, study abroad experiences. If that's available to you at your college university, make sure you at least for a semester, for part of a semester, try to get out of the country and see the world from a different vantage point. What else do I have here? The syllabus. The syllabus is so important. The syllabus is your key to mastering college. That first day of class, the syllabus is your Bible for that class. You can read ahead. You have all the readings. You know the assignments. You can get ahead. Like, you should mark that syllabus up. That should be your guide to every class you take in college. And professors' office hours. Even if you're doing well in the class, still stopping by your professor's office hour just to say hello. Again, going back to relationships, because relationships matter. And most importantly, college is about framing your mind as an analytical thinker, as a critical thinker. It's not so much about what you major in or what your degree is, but how you're going to be formed to solve problems, critical life problems when they're presented to you. And so every class you take, you should come into that class with at least one question, one big kind of human moral question. How will these readings help me solve this problem back home in my city, right? That should be your viewpoint, your perspective as you go into college. Most importantly, my final piece of advice, and I know this I had gave probably too many.
I love it. I love it. Keep going.
But definitely don't be afraid to fail. Not necessarily failing in a class, but again, going back to that part of being open-minded, doing something, daring to be different. And if it doesn't work, okay, get back up again and try something else. And just having a great sense of awareness of being shaped and being formed by the world around you, and just embracing that time. It's such an important time. It happens so fast, but it's such an important and critical time in the life of an individual. So those would be my nuggets for success.
I love it. I wrote a manuscript on strategies for college success, and put it down. It's done, but I got a little discouraged because I couldn't find a publisher. And so, but everything you mentioned is in my manuscript. So I'm going to have, so I love it. Embrace the experience, the entire college experience. Make sure that you're engaged in self-discovery. Make sure you're well balanced. I'm very much a nerd, and I didn't do a lot of things until my junior year, which was absolutely a thrill because I got in so many different organizations and had so many different experiences outside the classroom. So be well balanced, be open-minded, explore disciplines outside of your own, build relationships, which is key. You talking about building relationships with peers. I call them peer elders too. People who can advise you or who've been to college. They can be very helpful to your experience. Faculty are key, because faculty are the first people that know about those opportunities, those research programs, those internships, those scholarships. So you want to make sure you visit those faculty members during their office hours, as he stated, even when you don't need help. Just say hi, build relationships, and build relationships with people who are on staff. I could give some stories about that, about how important the cafeteria workers as well as the janitorial staff was to my personal experience. Participate in experiential learning programs such as internships, research programs, study abroad. I did all of that. Syllabus, he said it's your Bible. I used to say it's your contract. Now I'm going to say it's your contract and your Bible. And it helps you to get ahead. And frame your mind in each of your classes as an analytical thinker. And lastly, don't be afraid to fail. Those were great pieces of advice, and I'm sure the students who listen to my program will be delighted to engage many of those pieces of advice into their experience.
Yes, well, thank you, Dr. Houston. You were so formative in my college experience. So I'm grateful for you and your mentorship and just being just such a kind and generous person. Not only just every facet of life in the classroom and outside the classroom, personally and professionally. You've been just a dedicated and committed just mentor and friend and colleague, and I'm grateful just to know you.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure to hear that from former students, but also to hear, because I if my students want to maintain a relationship, I do, and you're one of the ones that I have maintained a relationship with over the years. I'm always here to support you, and I am just flattered about your success. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Houston. Thanks for having me.
A special thank you to the incredible team of the Empowerment Zone. Terry Gully, theme song. NADWorks, digital support, and of course, our featured guest.
If you enjoyed my podcast, please subscribe. We are on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Be sure to rate us on Apple Podcasts too. Thank you for your continued support.